The tracking dog suddenly froze at the edge of the forest, hackles raised and a low growl rumbling in his chest. The transformation was instantaneous, from methodical search pattern to rigid alarm. Every muscle in the German shepherd's powerful body tensed as he fixed his amber gaze on something beyond human perception. "Timber, what is it?" Lieutenant Claire Hartwood asked instinctively, tightening her grip on the leather lead. In their 4 years of partnership, she had learned to trust the dog's instincts without question. Timber's senses extended far beyond the limitations of her own perceiving threats, before they materialized, detecting patterns that humans could only guess at. The mid-morning sun filtered through the ancient pines, casting elongated shadows across the forest floor. They stood at the boundary between two worlds, the familiar meadow behind them, where the rest of the search team waited, and the primal wilderness ahead, a cathedral of towering trees and tangled underbrush that had remained largely untouched since the first settlers arrived in Ravenwood County. Claire's radio crackled with static as Sheriff Thomas Ellis checked their progress. She kept her eyes on Timber, watching the subtle communications in the shepherd's body language. The slight pivot of his ears, the twitching of muscles beneath his dense black and tan coat, the deliberate way he tested the air currents with his sensitive nose. "Something's wrong," she replied into the radio, her voice steady despite the unease spreading through her chest. "Timber's alerting, but it's not his standard cadaver response." She didn't mention how unusual the dog's behavior was, how in hundreds of search operations she had never seen her partner display this particular combination of alertness and reluctance. Timber was simultaneously drawn forward and hesitant to proceed, as if detecting both something that demanded investigation and something that warned against it. The search had begun at dawn when hikers reported discovering an abandoned campsite along the eastern ridge of Mount Blackwood. The missing hiker, Nathan Williamson, had set out 3 days earlier on what was supposed to be an overnight trip to photograph wildlife in the remote Widow's Valley. When he failed to return, his girlfriend had reported him missing, triggering the standard search protocols. Initial sweeps had located Nathan's vehicle at the trailhead, but the first day's search yielded nothing more. By dawn of the second day, the operation had expanded to include volunteers from neighboring counties, aerial reconnaissance, and Claire's specialized K9 unit. "Hold your position," Ellis instructed through the radio. "Carter and Ramirez are 20 minutes out from your location. Wait for backup before proceeding." "Understood." Claire acknowledged, though her attention remained fixed on Timber's unwavering focus. The dog had begun a soft, continuous whine, not his alert for human remains, not his signal for a living subject, but something altogether different, something she had never heard from him before. At 36, Claire had spent 12 years in search and rescue, the last 6 specializing in K9 operations. Before joining the Ravenwood County Sheriff's Department, she had served as a wilderness paramedic in the Rocky Mountains, where she had learned firsthand how quickly the seemingly benign natural world could turn deadly. That experience had taught her to respect the unpredictability of wild places and to trust her instincts when they whispered that something wasn't right. Those instincts were screaming now. She scanned the dense forest beyond Timber, seeing nothing unusual in the tapestry of green and brown that stretched before them. Yet something had triggered the dog's response, something beyond the range of human senses. "We'll wait," she told Timber softly, though the dog showed no signs of relaxing his vigilant posture. "Backup is coming." The minutes stretched like hours as they maintained their position at the forest's edge. Timber's alertness never wavered, his attention locked on something invisible among the trees. Claire used the time to check her equipment. The satellite phone secured to her tactical vest, the first aid kit in her backpack, the GPS unit displaying their coordinates in relation to the last known location of Nathan Williamson. The forest remained unnaturally silent. No bird song, no rustle of small creatures moving through the underbrush, just the occasional sigh of wind through pine needles high above. Claire had spent enough time in wilderness areas to recognize when something had disrupted the natural rhythms of a place. The animals knew something wasn't right here. When Deputy Ramirez's voice finally came through the radio announcing their approach, Claire found herself oddly reluctant to acknowledge some primal instinct, some ancient warning system buried beneath layers of training and professional detachment urged her to turn back to return to the meadow and the safety of numbers rather than venture deeper into whatever had silenced the forest. "Copy that," she forced herself to respond. "We're holding at the northeastern boundary grid coordinate Echo 7. Minutes later, deputies Michael Carter and Elena Ramirez emerged from the brush to their south. Both experienced search officers they approached with the quiet efficiency that characterized the Ravenwood Sheriff's Department's Special Operations Team. "What's he got?" Carter asked, nodding toward Timber's alert posture. "Not sure," Claire admitted. "It's not his standard alert for either cadaver or live subject. Something's different." Ramirez, who had worked with Claire on numerous operations over the years, studied the shepherd with professional interest. "I've never seen him this tense without barking. That's what concerns me," Claire replied. "This isn't in his training repertoire. This is something else." The trio surveyed the forest ahead, seeing nothing that would explain Timber's continued vigilance. The terrain sloped gently downward, the massive pines gradually giving way to a mixed forest of maple oak and hemlock, the transition zone that led to the valley below. "Sheriff wants us to continue the search pattern," Carter said. The last ping from Williamson's cell phone came from approximately 2 miles northeast of this position, before the signal disappeared. Claire nodded, making her decision. "We proceed with caution. Timber leads standard formation, 10-foot intervals, radio check every 15 minutes. She unclipped the tracking lead from Timber's harness, giving him the command that would allow greater freedom of movement. "Timber, find Sanemat." The German shepherd hesitated for only a moment, again behavior so unusual that Claire almost called a halt then and there before moving forward into the forest. His usual confident ground-covering trot was replaced by a more deliberate pace, each step placed with uncharacteristic care as he led them deeper into the silent woods. They moved steadily downslope, the vegetation growing denser as they descended into the valley. Shafts of sunlight penetrated the canopy in narrow beams, illuminating patches of forest floor, dappled with the shadows of swaying branches. The air grew noticeably cooler as they progressed, the natural temperature gradient of the valley amplified by the increasing density of the vegetation. After 20 minutes of careful movement, Timber paused at what appeared to be a game trail cutting horizontally across their path. The narrow track, barely visible beneath years of fallen leaves, curved away to the northeast, the general direction of Nathan's last phone signal. "Old hiking trail, maybe," Ramirez suggested. "Not on any current maps I've studied." Claire knelt to examine the compacted earth. "Too narrow for a maintained trail. Possibly a deer path, though." She didn't complete the thought, her attention caught by Timber's sudden change in demeanor. The shepherd had moved several yards along the narrow path, his body language shifting from caution to intense purpose. He looked back at Claire, then forward along the trail, a clear communication that he wanted her to follow. "He's got something," she said, rising to her feet. "Let's go." The path wound through increasingly ancient forest, the trees growing larger and more widely spaced, their massive trunks testifying to centuries of undisturbed growth. Mosses and lichens covered fallen logs in vibrant tapestries of green and silver gray. In other circumstances, Claire would have admired the pristine beauty of this old-growth sanctuary. Now she registered only the continuing silence, the absence of the natural sounds that should have filled such a thriving ecosystem. Timber moved with growing purpose, his earlier hesitation replaced by the focused determination Claire recognized from their training. Whatever had triggered his unusual behavior at the forest's edge, he now had a clear objective, and it lay somewhere along this meandering path. The terrain began to level out as they reached the valley floor. The path widened slightly, showing more signs of regular use than would be expected from wildlife alone. Carter, walking point behind Timber, paused to examine marks in a patch of bare earth. "Human footprints," he confirmed, pointing to a clear impression of a lug-soled boot. "Recent, maybe a day old." Claire felt a surge of hope, the first concrete sign of Nathan Williamson. Since his disappearance, Timber had already continued forward, his pace quickening, as he followed what Claire now recognized as both a scent trail and a physical path. The dense forest opened suddenly into a small clearing, perhaps 50 yards across, where the surrounding trees appeared to have been deliberately cleared many years earlier. At the center of this unexpected space stood a structure that made Claire stop in her tracks. A house. Not the dilapidated cabin one might expect to find abandoned in remote wilderness, but a proper two-story Victorian farmhouse. Its weathered clapboard exterior painted a faded gray-blue that had once been vibrant. The steep pitched roof featured ornate gingerbread trim along the eaves, though portions had rotted away. A wraparound porch partially collapsed on the eastern side encircled the first floor. Tall windows, most still intact, despite their cloudy glass, reflected the sunlight in dull gleams. "What the hell?" Carter murmured beside her, echoing Claire's unspoken thought. The house stood in impossible contradiction to its surroundings, too elaborate for a hunting lodge, too well preserved to have been abandoned for the decades it would take the forest to reclaim the cleared land around it, too far from any road or settlement to make sense as a homestead. Yet there it stood solid and undeniable in the middle of wilderness that the county records listed as uninterrupted national forest for over 60 miles. "This isn't on any map," Ramirez said, checking her GPS unit with a frown. "This entire valley is supposed to be untouched forest, Sunsuksaki." Claire turned to her radio. "Base, this is Heartwood. We've located a structure at our current coordinates. Two-story residence, appears a historical, but maintained, requesting information on any known buildings in this area." The response came through garbled with static. No record of structures in that grid signal breaking up. Timber had already approached the house, climbing the sagging steps to the porch. With a purpose that overrode his earlier caution, Claire followed quickly, not wanting to let her partner out of sight in these bizarre circumstances. "Timber, wait," she commanded, but the shepherd had already reached the front door, his nose working intently along the weathered wooden frame. The dog's body language had shifted again, the focused intensity of tracking, now colored with an edge of anxiety that Claire recognized from their most challenging recovery operations. Timber believed their missing hiker had been here recently. "Ravenwood Sheriff's Department," Claire called out following protocol, despite her certainty that the house was unoccupied. "We're conducting a search for a missing person. Anyone inside, identify yourself." Only silence answered, amplified rather than broken by the gentle creak of the porch boards beneath their feet. Even the forest sounds, what few existed in this unnaturally quiet valley, seemed to recede further, as if reluctant to approach the structure. "I'm seeing footprints," Carter noted, crouching to examine the accumulated dust and debris on the porch. "Multiple sets, some coming, some going." Claire knelt to examine one clear impression in a patch of dried mud near the steps. The distinctive pattern of aggressive lugs and a circular heel matched the description of Nathan's hiking boots perfectly. He was here. She confirmed, feeling both triumph at finding his trail and unease at the circumstances. "These are fresh, consistent with the timeline of his disappearance." Timber had positioned himself at the front door, looking back at Claire with clear expectation. Despite her growing sense that something was fundamentally wrong with this house and its presence in the valley, Claire knew they had to investigate. If Nathan Williamson had entered this structure, they needed to determine whether he had ever left it. Standard search protocol. She instructed her team, "Carter, secure the perimeter. Ramirez, you're with me and Timber for the interior sweep." Drawing her service weapon, Claire approached the front door, which stood slightly ajar. The weathered oak panel swung inward with a protracted groan that seemed impossibly loud in the surrounding silence. The sound raised the hairs on Claire's arms, not from fear of what might lurk inside, but from the unsettling sense that the house itself had voiced some ancient objection to their intrusion. The foyer beyond was dim despite the midday sun outside. What little light filtered through the cloudy windows revealed peeling wallpaper in an elaborate floral pattern, a wooden floor dulled by decades of dust and furnishings that appeared to have been abandoned rather than removed. A tarnished mirror hung crookedly on one wall above an ornate side table, its surface littered with what appeared to be mail and personal items long undisturbed. Claire executed a standard building entry clearing corners and sightlines as they moved from the foyer into adjacent rooms. The interior layout followed the typical pattern of late Victorian architecture: central hallway with formal parlor and dining room to one side of study and kitchen to the other. A grand staircase with elaborately carved banisters curved upward from the main hall to the second floor. Throughout their methodical sweep, Timber maintained an unusual proximity to Claire's side. Normally, the shepherd would range ahead, checking rooms and returning to guide her toward areas of interest. Here he stayed close alert, but reluctant to venture far from his handler. "The furniture's all still here," Ramirez observed as they entered what appeared to be a formal dining room. Like the owners just walked away one day. She was right. The large oak table dominating the room was set for a meal. Never served the tarnished silver and bone china covered in thick dust. Crystal glasses stood ready beside each plate, their once brilliant surfaces now clouded with age. A sideboard against the far wall held serving dishes and a candelabra that might have been silver beneath decades of tarnish. The kitchen beyond showed similar signs of abrupt abandonment: cast iron pots still resting on the cold wood stove, dried herbs hanging from ceiling beams, pottery crocks lining shelves along the walls. Yet among these antique remnants, Claire spotted something jarringly modern: an empty plastic water bottle in the corner. Its bright blue label a stark anachronism against the weathered wood and rusted metal of the historical kitchen. "Someone's been here recently," she said, photographing the bottle without touching it. "Not just our missing hiker." They continued their sweep of the first floor, finding nothing immediately alarming beyond the house's inexplicable existence and preservation. The study contained bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, their titles inscribed in fading gold leaf across spines cracked with age. A massive desk dominated the room, its surface organized with military precision fountain pen aligned perfectly parallel to a leather-bound ledger, a brass letter opener positioned at precisely the same angle to its right. It was when they reached a door beneath the main staircase that Timber's behavior changed dramatically. The shepherd stopped abruptly, his body stiffening as he stared at the closed panel. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not the aggressive warning he might give to a threatening person, but a deeper, more primal sound that Claire had never heard from him before. "Basement access," Ramirez observed quietly. Claire's flashlight beam revealed something she'd missed during their initial entry: small symbols carved into the doorframe, abstract patterns, lines, and curves that appeared deliberate rather than random vandalism. Similar markings adorned the floor at the threshold, faint lines scratched into the weathered wood. "These are recent," she said, crouching to examine them more closely. "And they're all around the door, almost like a boundary," Ramirez finished, "or a warning." Timber's growl deepened, his attention fixed unwavering on the basement door. In 4 years of searches, building clearances, and tracking operations, Claire had never seen her partner display such focused apprehension. She had first met Timber during the darkest period of her life. After a decade in wilderness search and rescue, she had survived the avalanche that killed her husband and 3 other members of their team during a recovery operation in the Sierra Nevada. The physical injuries had healed within months. The psychological wounds had proven far more persistent. Returning to work with the Ravenwood Sheriff's Department had been her lifeline. But the transition from high-altitude rescues to rural law enforcement had been challenging. Sheriff Ellis had suggested the K-9 program as a path forward, a way to utilize her wilderness expertise while developing new skills. At the regional K-9 training center, she had encountered a lean German shepherd whose evaluation read, "Highly intelligent, but requires experienced handler, shows exceptional search aptitude, but inconsistent responses to conventional training approaches. Timber's got too much drive for most handlers." The head trainer had explained. Found abandoned at a foreclosed property at about 18 months old, previous owner appears to have used inconsistent methods, sometimes reward-based, sometimes harsh corrections. Left him with trust issues but exceptional problem-solving ability. The first months of their partnership had been frustratingly difficult. Claire's by-the-book approach collided with Timber's independent assessment of situations. The breakthrough had come during a training exercise when she realized that Timber wasn't being stubborn. He was making contextual decisions based on factors her human senses couldn't detect. She had abandoned the rigid command structure in favor of a partnership model, learning to trust his judgment while providing the stable leadership he needed. Together, they had achieved certification records that remained unbroken in the program's history. Now staring at the basement door with its strange markings, Claire recalled the training director's words about trusting a dog's instincts, especially when human understanding failed. Timber wasn't just alerting to danger, he was communicating something specific about whatever waited beyond that threshold. "I'm going to trust my partner," she told Ramirez, placing her hand reassuringly on Timber's back. "If he's this concerned about what's down there, we need to find out why." The basement door resisted initially, then gave way with a protracted groan of ancient hinges. Stale air rushed upward, carrying the distinct mineral scent of underground spaces, mingled with something less identifiable. A sharp, almost metallic undertone that made Claire's nose wrinkle in involuntary distaste. "Temperature drop," Ramirez noted as noticeably colder air enveloped them. "Feels at least 15 degrees cooler down there. Owie." A narrow wooden staircase descended into darkness. Claire activated her tactical flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal a dirt floor approximately 8 feet below. The basement appeared larger than expected, extending beneath the entire footprint of the house. Stone foundation walls supported the structure above, while hand-hewn wooden pillars provided additional reinforcement at regular intervals. Unlike the relatively untouched first floor, with its preserved antiques, the basement showed signs of more recent activity. "Someone's been using this space," Claire observed, directing her light toward a modern camping lantern sitting atop an old wooden crate. Nearby, a sleeping bag was neatly rolled next to a small backpack. "Search team, this is Hartwood." She spoke into her radio. "We've located possible belongings of the missing hiker in an abandoned structure. Request additional units at our GPS coordinates." Only static answered her, the same interference they'd encountered since approaching the house. Claire checked her satellite phone, finding no signal, despite the technology's designed purpose of functioning in remote areas. "Communications are down," she informed Ramirez. "We'll document what we find and return to position once we've completed the search." They methodically photographed the scene with their phones. The backpack contained energy bars, a first aid kit, and a dog-eared trail map of Mount Blackwood, with handwritten annotations. A notebook nearby held cryptic entries. The final one dated the day Nathan had disappeared. "Going back inside today. Found the entrance mentioned in the journal. If legends about this place are true, I'll have proof nobody can dispute." Timber, who had been investigating the perimeter of the basement while maintaining proximity to Claire, suddenly stiffened his attention. Locked on the far wall, Claire recognized his body language immediately, the same alert posture he displayed when detecting evidence during building searches. "Timber's got something," she told Ramirez, who had been examining tool marks on one of the support pillars. The wall that had captured Timber's interest appeared ordinary at first glance, rough stone blocks forming the foundation. However, as Claire approached, her flashlight beam revealed subtle differences in the mortar pattern halfway along its length. Together, she and Ramirez examined the wall section carefully, eventually discovering a cleverly disguised mechanism, a protruding stone that, when pressed inward, released a catch. With a low scraping sound, a section of the wall approximately 3 feet wide pivoted inward, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Claire hesitated at the threshold of the hidden doorway. Every instinct from her years in wilderness rescue warned against proceeding without backup, without communications, without a clear exit strategy. Yet Timber had already moved forward into the passage, his behavior communicating urgency that overrode his earlier caution. "We need to document this before we continue," Claire decided, photographing the mechanism and hidden door. "If we lose communications completely, someone needs to know what we found." The passage opened into a circular chamber, approximately 15 feet across, floored with fitted stone slabs that contrasted sharply with the rough construction of the main basement. The walls bore faded markings, unfamiliar text, and intricate geometric patterns that appeared to have been carved into the stone itself, then inlaid with some dark material that gleamed dully in the flashlight beam. In the center of the chamber stood a stone table resembling an altar, its surface stained dark with substances Claire preferred not to identify. Surrounding it in a precise circle were 7 candles, 3 recently burned, their wax still soft. Most disturbing were the items arranged on the altar, a driver's license, watch, and cell phone that Claire immediately recognized from the missing person report. Nathan's belongings. She confirmed, photographing everything without disturbing the arrangement. But where is he? Timber's agitation grew as he circled the room, approaching the altar, then backing away, caught between his training to investigate and some powerful aversion to the stone structure. Claire had never seen her partner so conflicted in his responses. The dog's behavior suggesting both the drive to complete his assigned task and a profound reluctance to engage with the focal point of the room. Her flashlight suddenly flickered, then dimmed significantly. Ramirez's followed suit within seconds. A low humming emanated from the walls, building steadily until Claire felt it vibrating in her chest like the subsonic frequencies of distant thunder. The temperature plummeted, their breath crystallizing in visible clouds before their faces. Timber's behavior shifted dramatically. He positioned himself against Claire's legs in a protective stance, his attention fixed on an empty corner of the chamber. Instead of his typical aggressive barking when confronting threats, he maintained vigilant silence, muscles coiled for immediate action. "We need to go," Claire said, trusting Timber's assessment implicitly. Now, as they retreated hastily through the passage, Claire's failing flashlight illuminated one final detail, a fresh name carved into the altar's edge below others worn faint with age: Nathan Williamson. They emerged from the hidden chamber with a shared sense of relief that dissipated immediately as they encountered Deputy Carter standing at the base of the basement stairs. "There you are," he said, his voice oddly flat. "I've been looking for you." Timber's reaction was immediate and alarming. The shepherd positioned himself between Claire and Carter. Hackles raised a low warning growl emanating from deep in his chest. This wasn't the alert he'd given at the basement door or in the hidden chamber. This was his trained response to a human threat. "Everything okay, Mike?" Claire asked carefully, noting the unnatural stillness in the deputy's posture, the strange emptiness in his eyes. "Fine," he replied with the same flat effect. "But you need to come back. He's waiting for you both." "Who's waiting?" Ramirez asked, her hand moving subtly toward her sidearm. Carter's only response was an unsettling smile that never reached his eyes. He took a step toward them, movements mechanical, like a poor imitation of natural human motion. "We should head back up," Claire said, deliberately keeping her tone casual while signaling Ramirez with hand gestures they'd established during tactical training. "The rest of the team will be wondering about our status." "No one's coming," Carter replied. "This place doesn't welcome uninvited guests, but you two are special. You found the chamber. He's been waiting a long time for someone like you." Timber's growl deepened, his body tensing as Carter took another step forward. Claire had never known her partner to show aggression toward a team member. The shepherd knew each officer in the department and had always displayed appropriate friendliness toward them. Whatever stood before them now, Timber did not recognize it as Deputy Carter. "Stay back, Mike," Claire warned, drawing her weapon. "Something's not right here, and we all need to exit this building immediately. You don't understand the opportunity." Carter continued, his voice taking on an unsettling, multi-tonal quality, as if multiple people spoke in imperfect unison. "Few are chosen to join the household. It's a privilege, not a sentence." Without warning, he lunged forward with inhuman speed. Timber intercepted him before he could reach Claire, the shepherd's training engaging automatically as he drove the possessed deputy to the ground. With a controlled takedown, Carter fought with supernatural strength, throwing the 90-pound dog aside as if he weighed nothing. Ramirez fired a warning shot into the ceiling. "Stand down, Carter. Whatever's happening, we can get you help." The gunshot reverberated through the basement with unnatural amplification, the sound waves seeming to fold back upon themselves in acoustically impossible patterns. The air pressure changed suddenly, as if the house itself had drawn a deep breath. Carter paused, head tilting at an unnatural angle as he studied them. Then he smiled again. That empty, terrible smile and black fluid began to seep from the corners of his eyes. "The house has chosen," he said, voice now completely transformed into something ancient and multitudinous. "It's been so very lonely here. Erit, Armide, Anar." From the floor above came the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving across creaking floorboards. Not one set, but many a discordant symphony of movement that suggested the house was suddenly occupied by numerous entities. "Use the back way," Claire instructed Ramirez, pointing toward a narrow coal chute she had identified during their initial sweep. "Get to the perimeter and call for backup." "I'm not leaving you," Ramirez protested. "Someone needs to alert the team. This is beyond a standard rescue operation now." While they spoke, Carter had begun to change further. His skin stretched and distorted as if something beneath was rearranging his features. His uniform darkened with spreading steins that appeared to originate from within his body rather than from external injury. Timber launched himself at Carter again as the thing lunged toward Claire, buying precious seconds for the officers to retreat toward the coal chute. The shepherd's training was evident even in this extraordinary circumstance. He engaged without hesitation, using his weight and momentum to drive the threat backward. "Timber to me," Claire commanded as she helped Ramirez through the narrow opening of the chute. The shepherd disengaged, immediately racing to Claire's side as the thing that had been Deputy Carter regained its footing. The coal chute was barely wide enough for an adult human. Claire boosted Timber up, first the dog scrambling through the space with desperate efficiency. She followed immediately after, pulling herself through just as unnaturally elongated fingers grasped at her boot. They emerged into the fading daylight of late afternoon, far later than made sense given the time they had spent inside. The clearing around the house had changed subtly, the surrounding forest seeming closer and more densely packed than before, as if the trees had advanced while they were inside. "Run!" Claire instructed, not waiting to see if Ramirez followed. Timber took point, automatically leading them along the most efficient escape route through the encroaching forest. Behind them, the house seemed to ripple against the gathering dusk, its straight lines and angles momentarily fluid before settling back into solid form. The windows blazed suddenly with golden light from within, not the warm illumination of lamps or candles, but a sickly phosphorescence that spilled across the clearing like liquid. They had covered perhaps 200 yards when Claire heard Ramirez cry out behind her. Turning, she saw the deputy struggling through waist-high underbrush that Claire had no memory of passing through herself. More disturbing, the vegetation appeared to be moving independently, vines and branches reaching toward Ramirez with deliberate purpose. "Keep going," Ramirez shouted, firing her weapon at something moving in the shadows behind her. "I'll catch up." Claire hesitated only for a moment before continuing forward, trusting her colleague's judgment and recognizing the tactical necessity of at least one team member escaping to report what they had found. Timber raced beside her, occasionally ranging ahead to find the clearest path through the increasingly dense forest. The terrain sloped upward as they fled the gradual ascent from valley floor to ridge that would normally take over an hour to climb. Claire's legs burned with the effort, her tactical gear weighing heavily after the sustained exertion. The sun was setting with unnatural speed, the forest darkening around them as they climbed. A gunshot echoed through the trees behind them, followed by two more in rapid succession, then silence. Claire paused, gasping for breath, listening intently for any sign of Ramirez following. Nothing, no voice on the radio, no crashing through underbrush, no further gunshots. Just the oppressive silence that had characterized the valley since their arrival. Timber whined softly, pressing against her leg in a gesture that communicated both solidarity and urgency. The shepherd wanted to continue moving away from the house, his instincts driving him towards safety, with an intensity Claire could feel radiating from his tense body. They resumed their escape at a more sustainable pace, Claire navigating by the North Star, now visible in the darkening sky. If they could reach the ridgeline, they might regain communications with the base camp on the other side. The forest grew increasingly unfamiliar as they climbed, the terrain features no longer matching Claire's mental map of the area. the vegetation shifting to species she didn't recognize. Timber suddenly froze, his posture alert rather than alarmed. His ears pivoted forward, tracking a sound Claire couldn't detect. Then he surged ahead with renewed purpose, veering slightly east from their previous course. Timber, wait, Claire called, struggling to keep pace with the shepherd as he navigated the tangled underbrush with fluid grace. The dog led her to a small clearing where a solitary figure sat slumped against a massive oak tree. The beam of Claire's failing flashlight revealed Sheriff Ellis, his uniform torn and muddied, a makeshift bandage wrapped around his left forearm. "Lieutenant," he questioned weakly, squinting against the light. "Is that really you?" Timber's relaxed demeanor confirmed this was truly Ellis, not another manifestation, like the thing that had worn Carter's form. The shepherd approached the sheriff, cautiously sniffing his uninjured hand before allowing himself to be petted. "Sheriff, what are you doing here?" Claire asked, kneeling to examine his injuries. "You were supposed to be coordinating from base camp. We lost contact with your team," Ellis explained, wincing as Claire checked the bandage on his arm. "Ramirez's last transmission was garbled, but we understood enough to know you'd found a structure. I led a second team to your coordinates." He looked around the darkened forest. "Where's the rest of your unit?" Claire hesitated, struggling to organize the impossible events of the past hours into a coherent report. "Carter's gone. Ramirez too, probably. There's a house in the valley, a house that shouldn't exist. Something in it changed Carter. Affected his mind somehow." Ellis nodded grimly, as if this confirmed something he had suspected. "The Thornwood house I was afraid of, that—" "You know about it?" Claire asked, disbelief and relief mingling in equal measure. "Not officially. It's local legend stories my grandfather told that I dismissed as superstition." Ellis struggled to his feet with Claire's assistance. "The house appears every few decades, always after periods of unusual atmospheric conditions. There are records going back to the 1880s of hikers and hunters finding a Victorian homestead deep in these woods, though no such structure was ever registered or legally built." "What happened to your team?" Claire asked, noticing for the first time that Ellis carried no radio, no standard-issue equipment beyond his sidearm. "Scattered," he replied, his expression darkening. "We were separated almost immediately after finding the house," I heard screams. He trailed off, shaking his head as if to dislodge the memory. "We need to reach the ridgeline. Radio signals can penetrate there, and we might be able to call for proper backup." Timber had grown increasingly restless during their conversation, his attention repeatedly drawn back toward the direction they had fled. Claire recognized his alert posture. Someone or something was following their trail. "We need to move," she said, helping Ellis orient himself toward the ridge. "Whatever's in that house, I think it's hunting us now." They made slow progress through the darkened forest, Ellis's injury and exhaustion limiting their pace. Timber ranged ahead and behind, constantly checking their surroundings with professional vigilance. The shepherd's behavior had returned to normal, now that they were moving away from the house's immediate influence, a reassuring sign that whatever malevolent force dwelt there had geographical limitations. Ellis filled the journey with fragments of the legend he had dismissed for so many years. The Thornwood house, named for the family that had originally built it in the 1870s, had been the site of a massacre in 1891. The entire household, 7 family members and 4 servants, had been found ritually slaughtered in the basement chamber Claire had described. The perpetrator, a traveling scholar who had been given lodging by the family, had reportedly been studying ancient texts related to dimensional boundaries and thin places where the veil between worlds could be breached. Before killing himself, he had written a confession claiming that the ritual would bind the Thornwood family's souls to the house, creating a power source for some entity he had contacted through his research. "The strangest part," Ellis continued as they paused for a brief rest, "is that, according to county records, the house burned to the ground in 1892 after locals tried to purify the site. Yet every few decades, reports surface of hikers encountering a perfectly preserved Victorian home in these woods. And the missing persons cases, Claire asked, recalling Nathan's belongings arranged on the stone altar. Higher than average in this area always have been. Most are attributed to typical wilderness hazards, exposure falls, predator attacks. But a few cases have unusual elements. Personal belongings found arranged in ritual patterns. Search dogs refusing to track or acting strangely. Communications equipment failing inexplicably. Timber suddenly stiffened his attention, fixed on the darkness behind them. A low growl rumbled in his chest as he positioned himself between the threat and the humans he was protecting. "It's found us," Ellis said quietly, drawing his sidearm. Claire aimed her flashlight into the forest, the beam barely penetrating the thick undergrowth. Nothing visible moved in the darkness yet. Timber's warning growl deepened his body, tensing for action. From the shadows emerged a figure they both recognized, Deputy Ramirez, her uniform torn and muddied, but otherwise appearing unharmed. She walked with an oddly disjointed gait, as if unfamiliar with the mechanics of human movement. Found you?" She said, her voice carrying the same multi-tonal quality they had heard from Carter. "The house wants you back, all three of you, especially the dog. It's been so long since we had a guardian." Timber's growl transformed into a series of sharp, aggressive barks, his trained response to a direct threat. Claire raised her weapon, aiming center mass, as she had been trained to do, despite the familiar face before her. "Elena, if you're still in there, fight it," she called. "We can help you." The thing wearing Ramirez's form laughed, a discordant sound that seemed to emanate from multiple throats simultaneously. "Elena is part of the household now, as are the others, as you will be." It took another step forward, movements becoming increasingly unnatural. The house provides, the house protects, the house hungers. Without warning, it charged toward them, with the same inhuman speed Carter had displayed in the basement. Ellis fired 3 rounds in rapid succession, the impacts driving the creature backward momentarily before it resumed its advance. Black fluid seeping from the bullet wounds. "Run!" Claire shouted, firing her own weapon to provide covering fire. "Timber, go!" The shepherd hesitated, torn between his protective instincts and his training to obey commands. Claire fired again, her bullet striking the creature's shoulder, with no apparent effect beyond momentarily disrupting its balance. "I'll hold it off," Ellis said grimly, positioning himself between the advancing entity and Claire. "Get to the ridge and call for backup." "That's an order, Lieutenant." Claire wanted to argue to insist they retreat together, but tactical reality asserted itself. One of them needed to reach communications range, and with Ellis's injury, she had the better chance of moving quickly through the difficult terrain. "Timber with me," she commanded, turning to sprint uphill toward the distant ridgeline. The shepherd followed immediately, though she could sense his reluctance to leave Ellis behind. The sound of gunfire echoed through the forest behind them, followed by a cry that might have been pain or triumph, impossible to determine which or who had uttered it. Claire forced herself to continue upward, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she pushed her body beyond sustainable limits. The forest began to thin as they neared the ridge crest, ancient pines giving way to younger trees, and eventually to rocky outcroppings that marked the transition to alpine terrain. Claire's satellite phone remained stubbornly silent, but her standard radio crackled with increasing static that suggested they were approaching communications range. Timber reached the ridge first, pausing at its crest to look back at Claire with uncharacteristic impatience. The shepherd wanted her to hurry to cross some invisible boundary that his senses could detect, but hers could not. When she finally crested the ridge, the change was immediate and palpable. The oppressive silence that had surrounded them in the valley lifted, replaced by the natural symphony of a forest at night. The distant call of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through pine needles. The very air seemed lighter, cleaner, free of the subtle wrongness that had permeated the atmosphere around the house. Claire's radio suddenly burst into life, multiple voices calling her call sign with increasing urgency. She responded immediately, requesting emergency backup and extraction for her position. When asked about the rest of her team, she reported them missing, possibly injured, currently unaccounted for in the valley below. She did not mention the house, did not describe the chamber beneath it, or the entities that had warned her colleagues those forms. Those details would come later in secure debriefings with people qualified to assess their implications. For now, her priority was establishing a perimeter to prevent anyone else from entering the valley until proper resources could be mobilized. Timber pressed against her leg, seeking reassurance now that the immediate danger had passed. Claire knelt beside him, checking for injuries she might have missed in the chaos of their escape. The shepherd was physically unharmed but exhibiting signs of stress. Elevated respiration, muscle tremors, dilated pupils. "Good boy," she murmured, stroking his head with gentle hands. "You saved us. You got us out." Within an hour, helicopter searchlights illuminated the ridge as rescue teams converged on her coordinates. Claire directed them to establish containment along the ridgeline, preventing access to the valley until specialized units could arrive. She shared only the essential details: missing officers, hostile entity, extreme danger, keeping the full supernatural horror of what they had witnessed to herself until she could report directly to those with appropriate clearance. As medical personnel examined her for injuries, Claire kept Timber close at her side, unwilling to be separated from the partner whose instincts had proven so crucial to their survival. The shepherd maintained his vigilant observation of the valley below, occasionally growling softly when the wind shifted, carrying scents from the direction of the house. "Lieutenant Hartwood," a voice broke through her exhausted days. "I'm Agent Phillips, Department of Interior Special Resource Division." The man who approached wore civilian hiking gear rather than standard federal tactical equipment. His only identification, a discreet badge clipped to his belt. Behind him stood two similarly dressed individuals carrying specialized equipment cases with no agency markings. "We received your coordinates and preliminary report." Phillips continued, his tone professional but empathetic. "I understand you encountered a structure in the valley that doesn't appear in any official records. How did you get here so quickly?" Claire asked, immediately suspicious of the agent's timely arrival and specific knowledge. "We were already in the area," Phillips replied without elaborating. "My team specializes in investigating anomalous phenomena in national forest lands. What you encountered has been on our radar for some time. My people are still down there," Claire said, anger temporarily overriding her exhaustion. "Deputies Carter and Ramirez, Sheriff Ellis, and a missing hiker, Nathan Williamson." "What?" Phillips's expression revealed nothing. "We'll do everything possible to locate them, but I need to know exactly what you saw in that house, especially in the basement chamber." For the next hour, Claire provided a detailed account of everything they had experienced: the hidden door of the altar room, the transformation of Deputy Carter, the pursuit through the forest. Phillips and his team recorded her statement without visible reaction, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific details. "And your K-9 partner detected the anomaly before any human observer?" Phillips asked, studying Timber with professional interest. "He alerted at the forest boundary before you actually saw the house?" "Yes," Claire confirmed, resting her hand protectively on Timber's back. "He sensed something wrong from the beginning." Phillips nodded as if this confirmed a theory. Canines perceive certain frequency ranges and energy patterns imperceptible to humans. In documented cases involving similar anomalies, working dogs often detect disturbances long before their handlers. "Similar anomalies?" Claire questioned. "You mean this has happened before other houses like this one?" "Not houses specifically," Phillips replied carefully, "but locations where conventional physical laws become flexible. Boundaries between dimensions that occasionally become permeable under certain conditions." He turned to his colleagues who had been setting up what appeared to be advanced monitoring equipment along the ridgeline. "We'll take over the operation from here. Lieutenant, your team will receive a full briefing on need-to-know protocols in the morning." "I'm going back in with you," Claire stated firmly. "Those are my people down there." Phillips shook his head. "That's not possible. You've been exposed to the anomaly for several hours. Standard containment protocol requires a minimum 24-hour decontamination and observation period before re-entry would even be considered." Before she could protest further, medical personnel approached with extraction orders signed by the Regional Emergency Management Director Claire, found herself guided firmly toward a waiting helicopter Timber, still at her side as Phillips and his team prepared for their descent into the valley. The last thing she saw as the helicopter lifted off was the array of specialized equipment being activated along the ridgeline, casting an eerie blue glow into the darkness below. Whatever the Department of Interior's Special Resource Division actually was, they clearly had far more experience with the Thornwood House than they were acknowledging. Claire spent the next 72 hours in what was euphemistically called medical observation at a secure facility 3 counties away from Ravenwood. The medical staff monitored her vital signs, drew blood at regular intervals, and conducted cognitive assessments that seemed designed to detect subtle psychological changes rather than standard trauma responses. Timber underwent similar evaluations, specialized veterinarians examining him with equipment Claire had never seen in standard K-9 medical facilities. On the morning of the 4th day, Sheriff Ellis appeared at her door. His left arm was heavily bandaged and fatigue lined his face. But he was unmistakably himself, not the empty-eyed imitation she had feared might return in his place. "They found me unconscious about a mile from where we separated," he explained as they walked the secure facility's perimeter, Timber trotting beside them. "No sign of whatever was wearing Ramirez's form. No memory of how I got there." "And the others?" Claire asked, already knowing the answer from his expression. "No trace of Carter or Ramirez or Nathan Williamson." Ellis's voice was heavy with the burden of lost officers. "The strangest part is there's no house. The federal team found the clearing where we said it would be found evidence of our presence there. Footprints, shell casings from our weapons, but no structure, not even ruins or a foundation." Claire stopped walking, trying to process this information. "That's not possible." "We were inside it. We found Nathan's belongings in the basement chamber. I know what we saw." Ellis agreed quietly. "But whatever it was, it's gone now, or hidden." The federal team spent 2 days conducting their investigation before declaring the area clear. "Well, then, they know more than they're telling us," Claire said, keeping her voice low, despite the apparent privacy of their walk. This Phillips character, his Special Resource Division, they were already tracking the anomaly before we encountered it. Ellis nodded slightly. "I've been making some discreet inquiries. The SRD isn't officially listed in any Department of Interior organizational charts, but they appear at sites of unexplained phenomena, particularly in national forests and parks. They have clearances that override even FBI jurisdiction in certain cases." "What happens now?" Claire asked, watching Timber explore the perimeter fence with methodical attention. His way of establishing security boundaries in an unfamiliar environment. "We've been offered a choice," Ellis replied. "Sign non-disclosure agreements and return to modified duty with the understanding that the official report will list our colleagues as missing, presumed lost in a wilderness accident, or transfer to the SRD's Interagency Task Force to continue investigating similar phenomena." "They're recruiting us?" Claire asked incredulously. "They're particularly interested in you," and Timber Phillips was quite specific about the value of K-9 units with prior exposure to these anomalies. Apparently, dogs that have encountered such phenomena develop enhanced sensitivity to their recurrence. Claire considered this information as they completed their circuit of the facility grounds. The rational part of her mind wanted to sign the non-disclosure agreement, return to Ravenwood, and attempt to rebuild some semblance of normal life after the trauma they had experienced. But deeper instincts, the same ones that had led her to trust Timber's assessment of the house, told her this was merely the beginning of something much larger than a single isolated incident. "What are you going to do?" she asked Ellis. The sheriff gazed toward the distant mountains visible beyond the facility fence. "I'm too old to start chasing ghosts across the country. Ravenwood needs leadership, especially now. Someone has to honor Carter and Ramirez properly, even if we can't tell the whole truth about how they were lost." He turned to face her directly. "But you and Timber, you found the house when no one else could. You escaped when others didn't. That doesn't happen by accident. Timber had returned to Claire's side, pressing against her leg in the gesture that had become his signature expression of partnership. The shepherd's dark eyes seemed to hold a deeper awareness, now a knowledge of worlds beyond the visible, of threats, beyond the tangible. "We'll need time to think about it," Claire said, resting her hand on Timber's head. "And there are conditions I'd require for Timber's safety and welfare." Ellis nodded in understanding. "Take the time you need, but consider this: if there are more houses out there, more things like what we encountered, wouldn't you want to be part of finding them before they find someone else?" The question lingered in Claire's mind long after Ellis had departed. That evening, alone in her temporary quarters with Timber curled at the foot of her bed, she reviewed the SRD's preliminary offer. The classified document outlined a specialized unit focused on investigating anomalous phenomena in wilderness areas, with particular emphasis on sites associated with historical disappearances and unexplained events. According to their operational overview, the Thornwood House was one of several documented recursive manifestations that appeared periodically in remote locations throughout North America. Their current theory suggested that these structures served as anchor points for entities attempting to establish permanent presence in our dimension, a process that required human energy sources harvested through systematic disappearances. Most disturbing was the file's reference to similar incidents dating back to the 1800s, with patterns of manifestation that coincided with specific astronomical alignments and geological conditions. The Thornwood House had been documented in the same valley in 1891, 1923, 1957, 1988, and now 2023. Each appearance lasting approximately 3 weeks before vanishing, and each associated with multiple missing persons cases. Claire closed the file and moved to the window, gazing out at the facility's floodlit grounds. Timber joined her, his warm presence a reassuring constant amid the shifting reality of what she now understood about the world. "What do you think, partner?" she asked quietly. "Are we ready to hunt houses that shouldn't exist?" Timber's dark eyes met hers with that uncanny intelligence. She had come to rely on the wisdom that transcended species barriers and conventional understanding. He pressed his shoulder against her leg, offering not just affection, but solidarity, partnership, shared purpose. In that silent communication, Claire found her answer. They would join the Special Resource Division's task force, not despite what they had witnessed in the Thornwood House, but because of it. Someone needed to stand at the boundary between worlds to recognize the signs others might miss, to protect the unwary from forces they couldn't comprehend. And who better than a handler and dog who had already looked into the darkness and returned changed perhaps, but unbroken? Claire jolted awake, heart pounding, the remnants of a vivid dream clinging to her consciousness like cobwebs. In it, she had been back in the basement chamber, watching as the stone altar slowly opened to reveal an endless staircase descending into pulsating darkness. A voice had called to her from below, not with sound, but with thought, promising answers to questions she hadn't yet formed. Timber was already alert beside the bed ears, forward watching her, with an intensity that suggested he had sensed her distress even before she woke. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m., the exact time Nathan's final journal entry had mentioned. "Just a dream," she reassured both herself and Timber, but the shepherd's unwavering attention suggested otherwise. She rose and moved to the small desk where the SRD's file remained open. Something about her dream had triggered a connection, a detail previously overlooked. She flipped through the pages until she found the historical record of the Thornwood House's appearances. 1891, 1923, 1957, 1988, 2023. 32 or 33 years between each manifestation, with one exception. Between 1988 and 2023 lay 35 years, a disrupted pattern. Claire checked the astronomical data included in the file, finding references to rare planetary alignments that coincided with each appearance except for the current one. "Something's changed," she murmured, the realization sending a chill down her spine. "The cycle is accelerating." She grabbed her phone, hesitating only briefly before calling Phillips despite the hour. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert rather than sleep-fogged, as if he had been expecting her call. "You've noticed the pattern anomaly," he said without preamble. "The house isn't following its historical cycle," Claire confirmed. "Which means your models for predicting the next manifestation are invalid. More concerning is what the acceleration suggests." Phillips replied in intensification of whatever process drives these appearances. "That's why we need people like you and timber people with direct experience with innate sensitivity to these phenomena. I want access to everything you know," Claire stated firmly. "Not just about the Thornwood house, but all similar manifestations. If I'm joining your task force, it's as an equal partner, not a field asset kept in the dark about operational context." There was a pause before Phillips responded. "That can be arranged, though it will require additional security clearances. Are you formally accepting our offer?" "Danrai, Kishan." Claire looked at Timber, who had moved to her side, his unwavering presence a counterpoint to the uncertainty surrounding them. "Yes, effective immediately with the conditions for Timber's welfare that I submitted yesterday." "Understood. A transport will collect you at 800. Bring only essential personal items. Everything else will be provided at headquarters." Phillips hesitated, then added, "Lieutenant Hartwood, thank you. Few walk away from encounters with these phenomena. Even fewer choose to go back." After ending the call, Claire spent the remaining hours before dawn, organizing her thoughts and preparing for whatever lay ahead. She had requested and received permission to visit the K9 training facility, where she and Timber had first been matched, a necessary pilgrimage before embarking on this new path. The training center was located on the outskirts of Ravenwood County, a 40-acre compound dedicated to developing law enforcement and search and rescue dogs. Timber seemed to recognize the location immediately as they approached, his posture showing the particular alertness he reserved for familiar and significant places. Jason Fletcher, the head trainer who had paired them 4 years earlier, greeted them at the entrance to the main building. In his late 50s, Fletcher carried decades of K9 experience in his weathered face and careful movements, a man who had learned the language of dogs through patient observation rather than academic study. "Heard about what happened," he said after embracing Claire briefly. "Not the official version, the real one. I still have contacts in specialized services." He knelt to examine Timber, running experienced hands over the shepherd's body, studying his eyes and responses with professional scrutiny. "He's different now." "How can you tell?" Claire asked. Fletcher straightened his expression, thoughtful. "It's in his eyes, the way he's processing his surroundings. Dogs who've encountered the other side, they never come back quite the same. They see more than they did before." "You know about these things?" Claire realized, recalling Fletcher's enigmatic comments during their initial training about Timber's unusual perception. Comments she had interpreted as referring to the dog's search abilities, but which now carried new significance. Worked with SRD as a consultant in the 90s after a training exercise went sideways near one of their monitored sites. Fletcher confirmed, leading them toward a private office at the back of the facility. "Retired from field operations after that, but kept my hand in by developing protocols for K9s exposed to anomalous phenomena." The office was exactly as Claire remembered it from their first meeting. Walls covered with certificates and photographs of working dogs, shelves filled with books on canine behavior and training methodologies, a worn leather couch where handlers could relax during consultations. "Before you commit fully to this path," Fletcher said as they settled into seats, Timber positioning himself between them with characteristic vigilance, "you need to understand what you're facing. The standard briefing Phillips will give you covers the facts but not the experience, not what it does to you long term. You've seen these things yourself," Claire said. "Houses that shouldn't exist, entities that wear human forms." Fletcher nodded slowly. Different Manifestation Mine was an abandoned mine shaft in Colorado that somehow connected to tunnels that had never been excavated, leading to a cavern with architecture that predated human civilization. Lost 2 team members and 3 dogs before SRD contained the site. He leaned forward, his expression grave. "Working with these phenomena changes your perception permanently. You'll start noticing things at the edge of your vision, hearing conversations that seem to come from empty rooms, sensing presences that others can't detect. Timber will experience similar effects, but with his enhanced senses, the impact will be more intense. That's why I wanted to see you. Claire admitted, I need to know how to protect him through this transition, how to maintain our partnership when the foundations of reality are shifting beneath us. Fletcher rose and moved to a locked cabinet behind his desk. Using a key kept on a chain around his neck, he opened it to reveal a collection of items that seemed oddly mismatched: ancient leather-bound books, modern electronic devices with no apparent purpose, containers of substances labeled in languages Claire didn't recognize. He selected a leather collar, dark brown with intricate patterns tooled into its surface and subtle symbols burned into the interior lining. This was designed based on protective patterns discovered at multiple manifestation sites across cultures and time periods. It creates a subtle energy barrier that doesn't block perception but filters the most disruptive frequencies. Claire examined the collar carefully, noting the craftsmanship and attention to detail. This isn't standard issue equipment. Nothing about what you're entering is standard, Fletcher replied with a grim smile. SRD has official protocols and equipment, but those of us who've experienced these phenomena directly have developed our own supplementary measures. He returned to the cabinet and retrieved a slim journal bound in dark blue leather. Documentation from handlers who've worked K9s near anomalies, training adjustments, behavioral changes to watch for techniques for grounding both yourself and your dog when perception starts to fragment. Claire accepted the journal with a sense of profound gratitude. Why are you sharing this with me? Won't SRD object to unofficial resources? Because I remember the young paramedic who came here after losing her husband and team in an avalanche, who found her way back to life through partnership with a dog everyone else had given up on. Fletcher's weathered face softened with genuine concern. And because if anyone can navigate the shadow world without losing themselves, it's you and Timber. As they prepared to leave, Fletcher gave Timber a final assessment, watching the shepherd's responses to various stimuli with professional scrutiny. He's already developing enhanced sensitivity. The usual time frame for perceptual expansion after exposure is 2 to 3 weeks, but he's accelerating. Keep a daily log of behavioral changes, particularly alert responses, without apparent stimuli. At the facility entrance, Fletcher placed a hand on Claire's shoulder. Trust him even when what he's reacting to seems impossible. Dogs don't question reality, they simply respond to what is. That clarity will guide you when human perception begins to doubt itself. Claire knelt to secure the protective collar around Timber's neck, replacing his standard working collar. The shepherd remained perfectly still for the adjustment, his dark eyes reflecting an awareness that seemed to understand the significance of this transition. One last thing, Fletcher said as they turned to leave. The house you encountered, it won't be the last. Each manifestation changes those who survive it, preparing them for something else. Something they're being recruited for, though by what or for what purpose even SRD doesn't fully understand. You think we're being prepared, Claire asked, that the house let us escape for a reason? Fletcher's expression was solemn as he looked between her and Timber. I think when you step into worlds that shouldn't exist, you become part of patterns that unfold across decades or centuries. Whatever you experienced in that house, it was just the beginning. The black SUV waited at the facility gate, its government plates and tinted windows marking it as official transportation, despite the lack of agency identification. As Claire and Timber approached the rear door, open to reveal Agent Phillips seated inside. One visit before you commit, he observed, gesturing for them to join him. To the man who paired you with Timber in the first place. Appropriate, Tori. Claire settled into the seat beside him, Timber positioning himself at her feet with professional composure. You knew I'd want to see Fletcher. It's standard procedure for new recruits with K9 partners who've been exposed. Phillips confirmed, Fletcher provides perspective. Our official protocols sometimes lack the collar. For instance, SRD has tested similar designs, but found them inconsistent in effectiveness. Yet handlers who use Fletcher's version report better outcomes and stability in their partners. "You allow unofficial equipment?" Claire asked, surprised by this flexibility in what had seemed a rigidly structured organization. "Akern, we're dealing with phenomena that defy conventional understanding." Phillips replied, "Scientific method is our foundation, but we've learned to incorporate experiential knowledge even when it doesn't fit neatly into experimental models. Fletcher's insights have saved lives." The SUV moved smoothly away from the training facility, heading not toward the highway as Claire had expected, but deeper into the rural landscape of Ravenwood County. "I thought we were going to your headquarters," she said, noting their direction. "First, there's something you need to see," Phillips explained, "a local site with significance to your case." They drove for approximately 30 minutes, eventually turning onto a narrow dirt road that wound through increasingly dense forest. The terrain looked vaguely familiar to Claire, though she couldn't immediately place it. "The eastern boundary of Widow's Valley," Phillips said, answering her unspoken question. "Not where you encountered the house, but related to it historically." They parked at the end of the road and proceeded on foot along an overgrown path barely visible beneath years of accumulated forest debris. Timber moved alertly beside Claire, his new collar catching occasional glints of sunlight filtering through the canopy. After 10 minutes of hiking, they reached a small clearing containing the stone foundation of a structure long since destroyed. Timber's reaction was immediate and pronounced not fearful, but intensely focused, the same alert posture he had displayed at the boundary of the forest before they had discovered the Thornwood house. "What is this place?" Claire asked, watching her partner's response carefully. "The original foundation of the Thornwood house, built in 1873. Phillips explained. "After the massacre in 1891 and the subsequent fire in 1892, this is all that remained. Local historical records indicate it was abandoned rather than rebuilt due to rumors that the land itself had become tainted." Claire approached the foundation cautiously, noting the similarity in dimensions to the house they had encountered miles away. In another section of the valley, Timber stayed close to her side, his attention shifting constantly as if tracking invisible movements around the perimeter. "The manifestation you encountered wasn't a ghost of the original structure," Phillips continued. "According to our research, it's more like a spatial anomaly, a dimensional pocket that periodically establishes anchor points in locations with compatible energy signatures." "Compatible how?" Claire asked, kneeling to examine the stonework of the foundation. "Sites of significant emotional trauma, usually involving multiple deaths." Phillips replied, "The ritual murders in 1891 created what our researchers call a sympathetic resonance pattern that the entity behind these manifestations can connect with across time and space." "You talk about it like it's sentient," Claire observed, noting the deliberate personification in Phillips' description. "We believe it as though not in terms human consciousness can readily comprehend. It demonstrates purpose, adapts to opposition, and selects specific individuals for interaction, rather than affecting all who encounter it equally." Timber suddenly stiffened his attention, fixing on a specific section of the foundation, where the stonework appeared slightly different, newer perhaps, or repaired at some point after the original construction. He moved toward it purposefully, nose working the surface with intense concentration. "He's detecting something," Claire said, following her partner's lead. "This is why we bring K9 units to historical sites." Phillips explained, "Dogs can detect residual energy patterns, decades or even centuries after human senses would register nothing." Timber began pawing at the ground beside the anomalous section of foundation, his behavior shifting from alert to active indication. Claire recognized this as his signal for finding evidence, the same posture he would take when locating crucial items during criminal investigations. Using a folding trowel from her pack, Claire carefully excavated the area. Timber had identified 6 inches below the surface. Her tool struck something solid. Clearing away more soil revealed a metal box approximately 8 inches square, its surface corroded but intact. Phillips provided evidence gloves in a small containment case. Standard protocol for artifacts from manifestation sites. The box gets processed at headquarters before opening, Claire carefully extracted the box from its resting place, noting its unexpected weight and the faint vibration she could feel through the gloves, almost like the low hum of electrical equipment, though there was no apparent power source. "What is it?" she asked as she secured it in the containment case. "That's what we intend to find out," Phillips replied. But the fact that Timber located it is significant. Most detection dogs would have missed it entirely. They hiked back to the vehicle in thoughtful silence, Claire processing the implications of what she had learned. The Thornwood house wasn't a singular anomaly, but part of a pattern stretching back generations, manipulating human perception and behavior toward some unknown purpose. As they drove away from the site, Phillips outlined what Claire could expect upon reaching SRD headquarters. The facility is located in northern New Hampshire, deliberately isolated to minimize potential exposure events if specimens or artifacts become active. You and Timber will undergo a 2-week orientation and training program designed specifically for personnel who have direct experience with manifestations. And after training, Claire asked, watching the familiar landscape of Ravenwood County passing outside the window, perhaps for the last time, "You'll join our rapid response team that investigates potential manifestations nationwide." Phillips explained, "Your experience with the Thornwood house and Timber's demonstrated sensitivity make you particularly valuable for early detection scenarios." Claire stroked Timber's head absently, the shepherd having settled into a watchful rest position against her leg. "What about Carter and Ramirez and Nathan Williamson? Are you still searching for them?" Phillips's expression remained neutral, but Claire detected a subtle shift in his posture. Discomfort, perhaps, or reluctance to address a sensitive topic. "Technically, the operation remains open. Realistically, individuals absorbed by manifestations are rarely recovered in recognizable form. Rarely, but not never." Claire pressed, unwilling to abandon her colleagues so easily. "There have been cases." Phillips acknowledged 3 documented instances in the past century where individuals emerged from manifestation sites days or weeks after disappearing. All exhibited significant psychological alterations and variable amnesia regarding their experiences, which means there's hope, Claire insisted. Phillips met her gaze directly. "Hope is valuable, Lieutenant Hartwood. So is pragmatism. The SRD maintains monitoring equipment around all known manifestation sites indefinitely, precisely because unexpected developments do occasionally occur. But our primary mission must be containment and prevention of further incidents." The remainder of the journey passed in contemplative silence as Claire mentally prepared for the transition ahead. She was leaving behind everything familiar: her position with Ravenwood Sheriff's Department, her apartment in town, the routines and relationships that had defined her life since returning from the Sierra Nevada tragedy. Yet as she watched Timber's alert profile beside her, she realized she wasn't starting over alone. Their partnership had already withstood extraordinary challenges, emerging stronger and deeper for having faced them together. Whatever lay ahead in the shadowlands between dimensions, they would navigate it as they had everything else. Handler and dog moving in synchrony through unknown terrain, finding their way by instinct and trust when conventional maps failed. The SRD facility exceeded Claire's expectations in both scale and sophistication. Located on a 500-acre former military installation deep in the White Mountains, the complex combined state-of-the-art research laboratories with training facilities specifically designed for preparing field agents to encounter anomalous phenomena. Their quarters reflected the organization's understanding of the human-canine bond, a comfortable 2-bedroom suite with specialized features for Timber, including climate control tailored to working dogs, flooring materials selected for optimal traction, and a dedicated area for training equipment and gear. "Most of our K9 teams live on site," explained Dr. Elise Chen, the orientation coordinator who had greeted them upon arrival. "The nature of our work makes it easier to maintain security protocols and provide specialized support for both handlers and dogs." Claire noted that every staff member they encountered acknowledged Timber directly, not with the condescending baby talk some people used with dogs, but with the respectful recognition of a professional colleague. It spoke to a cultural understanding of working dogs as essential team members, rather than simply tools or assets. That evening, after settling into their quarters, Claire sat with the journal Fletcher had given her, documenting Timber's behavior and responses throughout their journey. The shepherd lay near the suite's large picture window, his attention seemingly fixed on the darkened forest beyond the facility's perimeter fence. "What do you see out there, partner?" Claire asked softly. Timber's ears pivoted toward her voice, but his gaze remained locked on something in the distance, something beyond Claire's perception. It wasn't an alert posture, not a warning of danger, but rather the focused observation of a sentinel cataloging changes in his environment. According to Fletcher's journal, this behavior was typical of dogs who had encountered dimensional anomalies and expanded awareness of overlapping realities that most humans couldn't perceive without specialized training or equipment. It wasn't dangerous or debilitating, simply an adaptation to new sensory information. Claire made detailed notes about the duration and intensity of Timber's focused attention, establishing a baseline for tracking changes in his perceptual responses. Whatever journey they were beginning required careful documentation, not just for SRD protocols, but for her own understanding of her partner's evolving capabilities. Tomorrow would bring their first formal briefing, medical examinations, and initial training sessions. For tonight, they rested and acclimated, preparing themselves for whatever lay ahead in the shadows between worlds. As Claire drifted towards sleep, her thoughts returned to the hidden chamber beneath the Thornwood house, the ancient symbols carved into stone, the altar with its dark stains, the fresh name etched among others, faded with time. Whatever entity created these manifestations, whatever purpose drove its systematic collection of human lives, she and Timber now stood in opposition to its designs. They would learn its patterns, understand its methods, and find ways to counter its influence. And perhaps, if fortune and skill aligned, they might even recover those it had taken, not just Carter and Ramirez, but all the others whose names had been recorded in that leather-bound journal she had glimpsed in the house's study. In her dreams that night, Claire stood again at the edge of the forest, Timber beside her, both watching as a house that shouldn't exist slowly took form in the clearing before them. But this time they were not unprepared. This time they understood what waited within. This time they stepped forward not as potential victims, but as guardians standing at the threshold between worlds, ready to confront whatever lurked in the shadow places between reality and nightmare. Together they would face the house in the pines and all the other impossible structures that waited in forgotten corners of the world, and they would not face them alone.